Chapter 4. The unexpected visitor. Christopher Robin's office was quiet, save for the soft clicking of his typewriter and the gentle hum of the city outside his window. The sunlight barely made its way into the room, casting a faint glow on the mountains of papers piled high on his desk. He had been working all day, hunched over, typing, reading, and thinking of nothing but the endless tasks ahead. But something strange happened that afternoon. Just as he was about to dive into yet another report, a soft, familiar voice echoed through the room. "Christopher Robin?" the voice asked, sounding a bit unsure. Christopher blinked, looking up from his work. He froze, his hands hovering above the keyboard, as his heart gave a little jump. He knew that voice. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years. He stood up slowly, his eyes scanning the office, half expecting it to be his imagination playing tricks on him. But then the voice came again, clearer this time. "Christopher Robin?" Christopher's heart raced as he turned toward the window. And there, standing on the windowsill, was a small, round figure that could only belong to one person, or rather, one bear. "Pooh!" Christopher whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. Winnie the Pooh stood there, just as soft and golden as Christopher remembered him. His little red shirt was slightly too small, and his round belly looked as though it had just recently been filled with honey. Pooh's bright, curious eyes gazed up at Christopher with the same innocence that had never changed, no matter how much time had passed. "Hello, Christopher Robin," Pooh said happily, waving his paw. "I've been looking for you." Christopher blinked, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. "Pooh? How are you here?" Pooh scratched his head thoughtfully. "Well, I went through the door, where I thought you might be. And here I am." Christopher stepped closer to the window, still unsure if he was dreaming. "But this is London, the city. You're supposed to be in the 100-acre wood." Pooh nodded, his face serious. "Yes, but something funny happened, and I ended up here instead. And now I'm lost. And I can't find Piglet or Tigger or anyone else. So, I thought maybe you could help me, Christopher Robin." Christopher felt a wave of emotions wash over him, surprise, confusion, but also a deep sense of nostalgia and warmth. Here was Winnie the Pooh standing in his office, just like he had so many years ago when they were both young. It felt like no time had passed at all. Without another thought, Christopher opened the window fully and helped Pooh climb inside. The little bear plopped down onto the floor with a soft thud, looking around the office with wide eyes. My, Christopher Robin," Pooh said, glancing at the stacks of papers and the dull gray walls. "This place is very different." Christopher chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Yes, Pooh. It's not like the 100-acre wood." Pooh wandered over to Christopher's desk, poking at the papers with his paw. "What do you do here, Christopher Robin?" "It looks very important," Christopher sighed, sitting down in his chair and rubbing his eyes. "I work, Pooh. That's what grown-ups do. They work, they go to meetings, and they solve problems. There's never enough time for anything else." Pooh tilted his head, his brow furrowing in confusion. "But why? Why do you do so much work?" Christopher paused, not knowing how to answer. It was a simple question, but one he had never really thought about. "Because that's what I'm supposed to do. Grown-ups have responsibilities." Pooh sat down on the floor, looking thoughtful. "I see. But, Christopher Robin, don't you remember when we used to do nothing? And how doing nothing often led to the very best something?" Christopher smiled, his heart softening. "Yes, Pooh. I remember." Pooh looked around the room again, then back at Christopher. "Maybe it's time to do nothing again, Christopher Robin. Maybe it's time for an adventure." An adventure. The word stirred something deep inside Christopher, something he hadn't felt in years. He had been so focused on his work, on growing up, that he had forgotten what it felt like to just be, to enjoy the simple things in life, like walking through the 100-acre wood with his friends, or sharing a pot of honey with Pooh. But now, with Pooh standing in front of him, that feeling was coming back. Maybe it was time for an adventure. Just as Christopher was about to say something, there was a knock at the door. Startled, Christopher quickly turned back to his desk, trying to hide Pooh behind a pile of papers. "Come in," Christopher called, his voice shaky. The door opened, and his assistant peeked inside. "Mr. Robin, your meeting is about to start." Christopher nodded quickly, trying to sound calm.
Right.
"I'll be there in a moment." His assistant closed the door, and as soon as she was gone, Christopher turned back to Pooh. But the little bear was no longer there. The office was empty, save for the papers and the ticking clock. Had it all been a dream? Had Christopher imagined the whole thing? But then, as he stood up, something caught his eye, a small honey-colored footprint on the floor, right where Pooh had been standing. Christopher stared at it for a long moment, a slow smile spreading across his face. Maybe it hadn't been a dream after all. With a newfound sense of excitement, Christopher grabbed his coat and headed for the door. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about work. He wasn't thinking about meetings or deadlines. He was thinking about something far more important, an adventure. As he walked down the busy streets of London, Christopher felt lighter, as though the weight of his responsibilities had lifted, if only for a moment. And though the world around him was full of noise and chaos, somewhere deep inside, Christopher felt a quiet joy. He knew one thing for sure. Pooh was right. Sometimes, doing nothing led to the very best something. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to find that something again.